师，各位学姐伙伴，各位师长，还有各位朋友，那大家好，我们非常感谢诸位来参加今天的人文大师下午茶的学术讲座与对话。那我们很感谢科技部人文社会中心的支持跟主办，谢谢美惠、以嘉等同仁的协助。那今天我们非常高兴邀请到美国耶鲁大学人类学系的教授萧凤霞教授 Professor Helen F 来访。那萧老师是美国斯坦福大学的人类学博士。那老师从1982年起就在 Yale University 任教。那在耶鲁大学主要讲授的专长领域是政治与历史人类学 （Political and Historical Anthropology） 以及都市与全球文化的变迁 （Urban and Global Cultural Change）。那萧老师在1970年代开始就在华南地区进行他的人类学研究，是一个非常长期的一个研究。那老师的主题以探索社会主义国家的特性，那也通过仪式、节庆、生命仪礼、商业等活动来讨论地方社会的文化认同与国家认同的一个变迁，乃至一个地方社会的一个形成，以及他们如何的重塑新的内涵与样貌。那晚近萧老师的研究重心也包含了中国的城乡的差异、香港的跨界议题，以及历史时期与当代的两际社会在空间的连接、空间时间的连接与重组。那从1983年至今，萧老师其实也通过了几本非常重要的专书，以及与其他学者合著编著的一个论文合集。像1989年，老师在 Yale University 出版了《Agents and Victims in South China: A Conversus in Rural Revolution》。那又如2010年，在香港大学的出版社出版了《Merchant's Daughters: Women, Commerce and Regional Culture in South China》。那乃至在最新的有 Asia Inside Out 3集对，然后2015年出版的2卷Changing Times and Connected Crisis。那2019年最新的The Third Volume Itinerant People， 都是在 Harvard University Press 所出版的。那我相信大家其实对萧老师都是很熟悉了那我想我就简单的介绍到此。那接下来就让我们以非常热情的掌声欢迎Professor Helen F， 他要给我们谈谈他如何从华南的研究出发谈论珠江流域与世界的一个联系好，欢迎大家，欢迎萧老师。
大家好，教授问我用国语还是用英文，我说我们在朋友推荐他们一定知道了，我们朋友们有一个笑话，就是说天不怕地不怕，最怕就是柯大卫跟萧凤霞讲普通话所以我想你可以的话大家不介意的话，我先用英文先讲一讲15分钟左右就是用英文讲得快一点，就是讲一点比较analytical 的东西，然后之后我的 PowerPoint 跟我的那个 Q&A 我们完全都可以用普通话的因为实在那个国语不是我的母语要是用广东话我就可以跟你们谈好久可是因为这30多年在耶鲁完全都是用英文的教课，所以我就是比较习惯的用英文可以吗 ？OK。So anyway, because what's happening in Hong Kong in the last week or so, I suppose everybody have seen, on TV and radio, whatever. And I've read some very, very good editorials from Len Hefao and others, and I was very impressed because I thought the Taiwan media is very, very informed and analytical. So I sort of switched my the focus of my talk a little bit, I will begin with Hong Kong and I'll end with Hong Kong. But in between, of course, there will be the vast area of Inter-Asia in the South China all the way to Africa and back. So that's sort of the way I try to organize my PowerPoint. I would, as I was telling my friends, I said last week, you know, I got back to Hong Kong from Yale on June 4th. And so, of course, that evening I went to Victoria Park and saw 180,000 people. And then, of course, a few days later, I was at the rally with almost 1 million people. And then I also watched what the police did to the young people on June 12th, and I got tear gassed myself. And then, of course, we went again on the streets on June 16th with probably twice as many people as June 9th. So it was, you know, I told my friends, I said, I've never seen so many Hong Kongers in my life in the street. And also, I've never seen Hong Kong police being so violent, being so 很凶，从来没见过。So my mind and my heart's still there. So even though I'm talking a lot about this vast area of Inter-Asia, I kind of like to link that with what's happening in Hong Kong and how the global media finally is paying attention to this little place. Okay? So in a public forum in Hong Kong last June, you know, on the theme of what made Hong Kong special, 香港特色, you know, on the question of how we define Hong Kong as a place. I thought, well, a very narrow definition of Hong Kong, or a very broad definition of Hong Kong as a place, will generate very, very different Hong Kongers, Hong Kong landscape, Hong Kong matters, and Hong Kong identities and imaginaries. So 香港人、香港地、香港认同。香港的那个想象 it's all about how you defined that place. And so I think behind this question, I think there's the analytical issue of how meaningful places are made, especially very maritime hubs like Hong Kong, you know, 跟海洋那个 you know, a very ocean-oriented hub. How are these hubs constructed by historical processes and by historical intersections of very multicultural translocal processes? And so, in a sense, if we think about Hong Kong as a place by narrowly defining it as the SAR, you know, sort of as that island, then we basically missed 80% of what Hong Kong is about. And I think that's what I would really like to illustrate with a PowerPoint, about what made these places very maritime hubs. And these processes, I think, have given a lot of resources for many coastal cities, not just Hong Kong, but Macau, Canton, all the way, you know, coastal, you know, along the China coast and all into the Indian Ocean and so on. And I think these historical processes, in fact, have given these cities a lot of resources today to selectively stage their unique characters and then to acquire some global branding. The question to follow then is that if all these Asian cities are doing that, and many of them would have colonial histories and all that link them to many other European and other Asian countries. So I think empirically for Hong Kong, in this kind of a situation, if these hubs would pose very serious issues for national polities, like China, for example, because in the past 20 years, after the sovereignty of Hong Kong changed hands, I'm particularly concerned with the challenges of a very special administrative region like Hong Kong, what it faces when a very land-based authoritarian sovereign power like China intensifies its efforts to absorb a very worldly city into its own national space. So that is, I think, what's happening in Hong Kong in the last 20 years. And especially, over the years when China started its reforms, it was rather gentle in sort of spreading to the rest of the world. But it did, gently or aggressively, like today. Asia, or the inter-Asia that I'm going to show you, basically become the front line, to meet China's rather aggressive presence. And therefore, I think this is very important for us to get a sense of what this huge region, I identified as inter-Asia region, in which you see hubs like Hong Kong, Macau, Guangzhou now, and then many other cities along this Asia front. And I think, so I would like to use this kind of framework to contextualize what I'm going to show you today. So if I ask myself, what is 香港的本土? What is Hong Kong local? My idea is that Hong Kong local is extremely big. It's not this, right? As I just said, if we think about Hong Kong local as historically global, because of the British colonial presence and many other maritime trading relationships, then it will be, that if we just look at this place as Hong Kong, then as I said, we miss 80% of what Hong Kong is about. So we cannot treat these cities as bounded administrative spaces. On top of it, I've always, since my work very much has been on southern China, I was very appreciative of the history and the culture of what, the heritage of what Hong Kong as a place, as a very porous place, have received or being supported by a very large region we call southern China, Ningnan 文化跟历史. And therefore, to me, Hong Kong, Macau, Canton, and I call Canton rather than Guangzhou, there's a reason for it, all these hubs together with the Ningnan Pearl River Delta, I think it's, it's not separable. But at the same time, if we think hard on Ningnan, which I'm going to show in the PowerPoint, Ningnan itself, southern China, is not like the agrarian China of the Central Plains. There's a real difference between northern China, which is agrarian, still rather inward-looking, 黄土地, kind of culture and society, and comparing that with Ningnan and then beyond, then you see a very maritime world, which is very, very different. And therefore, I would like actually to emphasize that point, that when we talk about Hong Kong, we cannot ignore both southern China, which from historical periods was very, very outward-looking in the first place. And then also we cannot ignore the world that came to this part of Asia for centuries. And so that is, as an anthropologist, I've walked in the last 10, 15 years from southern China all the way to Africa. And quite a few of the slides I would like to show are very much, my walking through these landscapes. And so I would say, if we think about this region that way, then I would say the present, to imagine and to to understand the present and the future of Hong Kong and the vicinity, I think we really need to apply this method of historical anthropology. That is, to see in the making of a place we call Hong Kong, or a hub we call Hong Kong, how do we appreciate the layers of the centuries of movement of people coming from different parts of China onto this place, bringing their resources, bringing their values, and then at the same time we have the world, the British colonial being one, bringing lots of very multi-ethnic populations. So together, Hong Kong had always been a land of opportunities and a land of refuge, according to Professor Wang Genggu. Actually, he and I are very much in agreement on this. And with all these layers of cultural resources being built up, being transformed by people who came and went, bringing values to this place and then taking slices of Hong Kong with them. That is basically the two systems side of any city. And so in talking about Hong Kong, I'm really not just talking about the city, but in trying to create a way, a historical anthropological way to appreciate these fuller historical processes that bring us from the local to the regional to the global. And hopefully I would now use the PowerPoint to sort of to illuminate some of what I mean. Okay? Oh, I suppose I would love to later, quote a quote emphasizing Hong Kong by this very famous Taiwanese writer, Lung Ying-tai. And I can't really use her quote in Mandarin because it's a little hard for me to say it, but let me say it in English. She was, in 1997, she actually spent quite a bit of time in Hong Kong as a humanities professor at Hong Kong University. And she was describing to us in her writing, in a book called 香港笔记, and said that, well, in 1997, the flower Bohemia, Bohemia, was made a city flower of Hong Kong. And she said, either, the person didn't know anything about Yanji Jinghua, or maybe, he or she was extremely intelligent. Because if you think about these Bohemia, that it's a hybrid flower, which cannot propagate by itself, from seeds or whatever, except by cutting and grafting, and its claim of origin being incidental at best. It was through an effort of a French missionary there. But then these flowers bloomed in luxuriously beautiful ways. And he said, every element to this flower closely matches the legendary life history of the island itself. And so that's what, a city like Hong Kong is. That, different elements got combined and then recreated, regenerated, and still constantly being remade today. And definitely, we saw that being remade one big time in the last week or so. So I just thought that, in talking about this inter-Asia front with all these various populations, we can also see the human agency at work. That, I think, is a key concept that is very important for historical anthropology. So, okay, so I think without further delay, let me just start with the PowerPoint. So anyway, so as I said, placemaking. So how big is local? And you could tell I was, I'm using two of my close colleagues' words. One is Jingmei Bao教授, and she talks about Canton, Macau, Hong Kong being hubs along a very, very global Cantonese soundscape across the oceans. And I'm going to use also a close colleague of mine, Liu Zhiwei and David Faw, to talk about the Ningnan region, being formed between land and sea. And again, this is a kind of process that I would like to emphasize methodologically, because so much of social science has thought about entities very much land-based and state-centered, like Zhongguo, 美国, a country, a population, a culture, and so on, an economy. But whereas if you think about another colleague, some of the colleagues who would not want to focus on a land-based entity, but instead jump to the ocean, like Karen Wiggle from Stanford and her husband, Martin Lewis. They wrote a book called The Myth of Continents, and they advocated a reshifting of our focus to define populations and cultures and countries and whatever societies by focusing on the ocean. But I think either land or ocean, it's basically still rather bounded and static. Ocean better, but for us in the Ningnan region, we study river deltas. River deltas are constantly making, from ocean to land. So it's constantly in the process of becoming. And so the question is, how do you study a place that's constantly moving? How do you, install a research design that use change as constant? So these are very, very important, at least social science questions. When I challenge my students as to how they start thinking about their research design on what. So if that thing is constantly on the move, that's why Professor Jian actually mentioned this 3-volume with Harvard Press that we just put together with. I did it together with 2 historian colleagues of mine. One is Eric Tagliagoso from Cornell, and the other is Peter Perdue from Yale. And we basically call the volumes Asia Inside Out. And we use this kind of processual connectedness over centuries of historical time and place and people to talk about what Asia is all about. So it's not East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, Middle East, or whatever. But instead, if it's an Asia inside out, then the first volume is about moments of connection. The second volume was about sites of connection. The third, the itinerant people who make those connections. And so by doing so, we organized about 30-some colleagues of ours sharing very similar methodological concerns to start rethinking what localities, places, regions, polities, and even huge regions we call Asia. And so that is where we are. So, 本土有多大? This this southern China Ningnan region, we would say 这个本土大得很。Qingmibao and Ningnan region are very much in these larger fluidities of Ningnan that we would like to discuss. So why would we do that? And I think this is again a concept I shared with Professor Wang Gangwu. He recently gave a very important talk at Hong Kong University called China South. And he was focusing on a north-south, land-ocean reality to counter the usual understandings, or at least in political talk and in academic talk, about a dichotomous East-West mindset. Hong Kong is always saying that it's a land, a meeting place between East and West. But in fact, if we really look closely, it's a north-south, a land-ocean divide, far more than an East, or if not equally important as the East-West. And the question is, if we add the North-South and the East-West dimensions into this fuller way of looking at placemaking, then the missing link is this interracial Eurasia region. That somehow, even China, always, political talk, 超英赶美嘛. But, Professor Wang Gangwu always said, lamented that, in these kind of mindsets, China does not understand Asia at all, particularly Eurasia. And so it's very, very serious, especially now. China is so aggressively trying to implement this 一带一路, one belt, one road strategy, without understanding that vast region at all. So how is he going to do it? Right? So that is sort of some of the larger issues, intellectually and politically, that I've been thinking about when I ask myself, 本土有多大? So we have to take a very quick look at this 一带一路的前世今生. I think, if we take the historical layers into consideration, then 一带一路 is very, very, is a variegated landscape. It crosses, there's a lot of mobility across the sands, across the mountains, across the valleys. I took this. Can people recognize where this is? It's okay, good. Xinjiang, Gaochang, And it's true, when the 西游记, they talk about, 那个火 how do you say it? 火焰山. The everywhere, it was really sort of brown and reddish brown. There it was. And Valerie Hansen, my colleague at Yale, definitely said, yes, this is Xinjiang. Look at the camels, they have 2 humps. In the Middle East, if it's Dubai or whatever, Abu Dhabi, whatever, there's only 1 hump. So I think she did tell me that, yes, this is truly Xinjiang. But then, this 一带一路, the vast landscapes are so varied in ecology. This is in Guizhou. This is beautiful, lush green terrace hills. I'm going to rush because I think I have a lot of pictures. And then, of course, you see mobility. People cross. These are, the populations, they go over, valleys and mountains and everywhere, and they're very, very mobile. So the maritime South China, it's in fact very linked to all these other regions, that we now call the region covering the 一带一路. As I just said, rivers, deltas, bays, monsoons. There's a lot of different ethnicities, people crossing these boundaries. And if you think about that whole region, 一带一路的前世, it's driven, the energies were driven by traders, by multi-ethnic traders, and by all sorts of populations and countries, in a sense, the kind of hard externalized powers and government or political regimes were not as present. There were sultans, there were empires, and China, for a long, long time, during those centuries, were very much just among many players. Unlike today's 一带一路, when China has become the dominant power player. But in the past, the 一带一路 region was, full of very, differentiated landscapes and mixtures of cultures and peoples. You definitely saw the Tamils, the Arabs, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British. So in a sense, it's very, very difficult to name an externalized political power over it. And also the movements were very much in tune with nature. The sailing, the boats carrying all the goods, back and forth, were in tune with the monsoons, with the tides, whatever. That's how they could do it. Again, very different from the kind of very hard infrastructure that China is now financing these countries to just plow right through the natural landscapes, in the air, through satellites and the rivers and deserts and whatever. So the 一带一路的前世今生, there's quite a very, very different political dynamic in which China played a very, very different role. So let's start with southern China, in this historical period of this interracial region. Cultural roots, Nan Yuehuang, this was a general during the Qin Han period, Jiao Tuo, who led his troops from the north. He came down to southern China, to Panyu, near Guangzhou, and declared himself Lord of the South, almost declaring independence. But of course, Chinese history today would make him like a Han general conquering the indigenous peoples. But in fact, he turned native. It's very interesting that in the tomb of his grandson, that's discovered in the heart of Guangzhou city today, Nan Yuehuang, that's his grandson. You see in a lot of these tools and the quadrants and whatever, the motif were very, very maritime. Long boats. This is a battle scene with feathers and heads cutting off, whatever. But it's definitely at that time, that whole area of the Pearl River Delta was just ocean. And then, even more surprising, this was given to me by Professor Qingmei Bao from Guangzhou at the time. And in the tomb, you also found, this silverware that obviously had its origin in the Persian civilizations. How did these, silverware got to be in the tomb of this guy who is living in 200 BC times? So obviously there were some connections way back already. Then let's jump centuries. Nanhai Shen Miao. I think some of us have gone there. Cui Ping, have you been there? Kedawei didn't take you there?
No.
Nor did I?
Took me there. Somehow.
Next time,
Yes.
And your students. Nanhai Shen Miao is actually the temple for the god of commerce. 那个是那个南海神，就是上夜的神。And it's situated at the waterfront, or the former waterfront of Guangzhou's, of Canton City. And it was there since the Sui dynasty, so it was 15 centuries ago. This is renovated, still there. It's a pilgrimage center today. But as you know, a lot of the China temples always would have a whole pantheon of the gods. 什么神都有的，很多很多的。其中一个就是很奇怪的，这个当然不是中国人呢，那么他什么时候在？不知道。So we don't know where he came from and when, but there were literati people in the Qing who wrote about him and guessing where he came from. And in his earlier statue, he was like this. And from different sources, we figured that he must have been a Tamil, Southern Indian merchant, who probably, during some of the times in the Sui Tang period, ended up in Guangzhou doing trade, but never got home. The boat probably left without him, and for the whole, life he was looking for the boat to come and pick him back, and he died. And over the centuries, became a part of the local folklore. That was the interesting thing. That for a long, long time, that area, probably already had these merchants' presence. And I asked these some of the old ladies there, around the temple, and because in the popular name for this temple is called Bolo Miao, Bolo Miao. In Cantonese, it means bolo, means pineapple. And so I asked the ladies, how come you got that name? And they said, well, we used to have a pineapple tree here. I beg your pardon. If you go to Hawaii, bolo don't grow on trees, right? But anyway, and so I asked a Tamil-speaking colleague, actually, one time. I said, do you have a Tamil word, something like bolo or something like that? And he said, oh, it's something similar to over the other shore. That's like a Buddhist idea. So you could figure out why, in a temple in Guangzhou, over the centuries, that it became part of local culture, that foreign elements were very much part of it. So we jump centuries again. In Guangzhou, there are 4 mosques in Guangzhou. This is the oldest that was built in the Tang Dynasty, Guangta. And you see, Chinese architecture combined with the Muslim architecture. And Guangta, actually, in some historical records, Ibn Battuta, I don't know if people might heard of Marco Polo, but not Ibn Battuta. But Ibn Battuta lived about 50 years after Marco Polo, traveled from Tunisia all the way over to Asia, became an official in India, and then ended up visiting this place in Guangzhou and visiting this mosque. And so there, again, you could see, even Guangzhou, I'm not talking about Hong Kong now, but the whole region being very much hooked to maritime trade from very, very early on. And of course, with trade, it also came, religion also came. And that was probably when the Arabs were coming very rapidly from the Tang, Song, all the way up to the Ming. But there's also Muslim cemeteries in the city. We were able to get into the cemetery, very, very old one, and the imam, actually, the young imam from Beijing, actually, showed us the mosque. And inside there is, of course, the Dalitang, right, the worshipping place. And if you look at the architecture, it's of course, David Ford, my colleague, would say, it looks like a Chinese ancestral hall. I mean, it's like a Tang, right? But of course, the Arabic and whatever, you could tell it was a Muslim mosque. So again, the hybridity, the cultural fusion in the area was just so taken as natural in daily life. And then there are others. By the time you going beyond the Tang and the Song, you go and jump centuries into Ming and the Qing. You also see many, many different things that will tell us how connected southern China was with the rest of the world. That's definitely Zheng He. Everybody know his trips. And if you look at the boat, Zheng He, the Baochuan, right, compared to Columbia, Christopher Columbus boat, I mean, it's amazing, is huge compared to what Christopher Columbus boat was. So 7 of these trips going throughout linking this Interasian region with southern China. And today you still see the coordinated transportation. This is a dhow, an Arab transport boat. In the past, in historical times, a lot of these large Chinese boats would go very quickly from Canton or Quanzhou and Canton, all the way through Strait of Malacca into the Indian Ocean, but ended up being in southern India, and then their goods would be transferred into these smaller boats, and then onto the Gulf area. Because if you think about the Gulf, especially along today's UAE, the water was too shallow for the big Chinese boats, so you have to have the dhow to transfer. So there's a lot of very coordinated efforts by multicultural merchants. Now, what language they spoke, I have no idea. Some historians will be able to tell me, probably Arabic. Of course, there were elite goods, but there's also bulk goods, spices and grain and all sorts. And then, a few years ago, of course, at the University of Oxford Library, somebody discovered a very, very rare map, Selden's map, and here it is. And it's really, from the words that's, the names of on the maps and so on, it's all transcribed in, from Fujianese dialect. So it's very clear that that map was constructed by Fujianese merchants and their view of the world. But again, the energy, the area that's energized basically by multi-ethnic and of course including the coastal populations of the China provinces at the time. And again, using the Selden's map, we could really get a sense of how the southern China population understood the world through the trade routes into Central Asia and beyond. And then all along today, when we were walking the field, we saw a lot of supposedly objects out of place. But are they really objects out of place? Well, this is Zheng He's famous picture of the giraffe from Somalia. That was given to Zheng He's expedition, not in Africa, but by a sultan, a prince in Bengal. Now, how that poor animal got from Africa to Bengal, I have no idea, but then it made it to, of course, to Nanjing, to celebrate his coronation to be emperor at the time. Of course, at the time, nobody in China would know what this animal was, and so they all thought that it was a qilin, the very mystical animal. But again, there's a lot of these kind of, animals and people and goods moving across the Indian Ocean even then. And this is even more fascinating, and this obviously has something to do with Taiwan's history. Eric Tagliagoso gave me this painting. That was the sea lord Zheng Zhilong. That's the Koxinga's father. He had a Japanese mother, grew up or came of age in Macau, was a Catholic. And in this picture, it shows that while he was in Taiwan as the Sea Lord then, fighting the Qing troops on the one hand and the Dutch on the other, he recruited 500 African guards, mercenaries, freed slaves, who ended up in Macau. He recruited 500 of them to be his bodyguard. So there it is. That was some of the encounters of the Chinese with the Africans. But through a mediation or a reinterpretation of the Arab slave trade and the Arab trade in that region. And so here you are, again, very, very culturally and politically hybrid that we have to understand. So these black guards, being Zhang Zhilong's bodyguard, it's not objects out of place. I mean, if you really think about that very organically evolving historical context, they were perfectly in place. It's just our own analytical categories didn't allow that kind of connections to have materialized. And of course, there's this Chinese fishing nets in Kochi, southern India, and then Jewish settlements also in that area. We actually came across in our trips. We went to a synagogue, 12th century synagogue in a town just outside of Kochi, and we found a tomb for a Jewish young woman who died there. So again, these are they objects out of place, or were they totally in place, given the historical, organically connected histories of the time? And this was Penang. 旧施公司一个大祠堂, one of the biggest Chinese ancestral halls in Penang. And of course, there they were guarding the temple or guarding the ancestral hall was this Sikh, 印度的那个how do you say that? Sikh guards. And we actually visited some of the Chinese cemeteries up the hill in Penang, and in front of these Chinese tombs, there's a lot of these Sikh gods statues as well. So again, they are totally in place. And so when we come back, so we're looking at all these, so-called, fusion elements. And if we come back to the making of southern China, why I would say that Ningnan was from day one, very, very maritime and very outward-looking, rather than being associated with Zhongyuan, with the central province, with this Huang Tu Di. You look at, I would say, please refer to my colleague's work, David Ford's work, Ke Dawei's work on southern China lineages. And the lineage estates were huge in that area, in the Pearl River Delta. And they were very much, they had to do with massive land reclamations. And so by the 1949, when the communists came to this area to implement the Tugai, the land reform, they didn't know who the Dizhu is, because everybody is a Dizhu. And our informants were saying that if you take a long pole and you just go like this, everybody would be Dizhu. So it ended up it was impossible to do any land reform because it's very, very collective, and it has to do with the vast accelerated land reclamation projects from the Ming all the way to the Minguo, to the Republican era. And so the ancestral, the so-called, 中国3000年的什么什么文化, but ancestral estates and ideas about 宗族 and all that were very, very tied in southern China with a maritime ecology. And then these lineage halls too, in some of my research sites, the most prestigious building materials were oyster shells. And these are just some of the very large ancestral halls. And then, of course, the ancestral estates are also owned not only land, but also matou, big piers that can actually take boats going all the way to Guangzhou and even to Singapore. And then folklore, you also see these communities with temples and all that, having to do with Hongshan. Hongshan is very much a river god in Hongshan. And then Zhang Bouzai. Zhang Bouzai was one of the very famous pirates fighting the Qing troops in the late 18th century. And so in the local folklore about whether the pirates were attacking the community and then how the Hongshan, Hongshan Ye, sort of drove away and scared off the pirates and all that. So you could tell, even in folklore, it's very, very water-based. And that's the temple, the Hongshan temple that I mentioned. They still kept a boat that supposedly just appeared out of nowhere in the mist and drove away Zhang Bouzai, the pirate, back in the late 18th century. So that's one of the pictures depicting the battles between Zhang Bouzai and the Qing troops in the Hong Kong waters, back then in the 18th century. So, but let's get to something less hard, but much more cultural and soft. Let's talk about soundscape. The whole idea of Cantonese sound, music, performances, and so on. And they are historically layered. Again, I can easily bring it back to, last week when Hong Kong had this million people march on June 9th. 29 cities in 12 countries in this whole area that Professor Qing Mi Bao mapped out, Macau, Guangzhou, Hong Kong, and then all the cities, what she called Dongyang, Xiyang, Nanyang, and then Xinjinshan, that's New Gold Mountain, and Jiujinshan, that's Australia and San Francisco. All those communities, Cantonese-speaking communities on June 9th, staged their own rallies in solidarity. Now, that suddenly created this very, very global Cantonese soundscape that was linked to Hong Kong as a place. And so when we talked about the historical layers, those were the layers that we have to take into account. And Qing Mi Bao actually talked about this as the Sheng Gang Ao, Dongyang, Xiyang, Nanyang, and then Xinjinshan, Jiujinshan, and then in the 20th century you also added Shanghai. That was this very, very, so when I said 本土有多大非常大就是这样. And they are connected with a particular elite Cantonese, which is called Xiguanhua. It's basically an elite urban language, urban dialect of Cantonese. Cantonese is from day one an urban phenomenon, and it's called the West End Cantonese. I'm supposed, people told me that I speak a rather pure form of West End Cantonese. I'm sure I learned it from my father, and he learned it from his father, and so on and so forth. Being, in the merchant community in Guangzhou then. But its urbanity is diaspora. So I'm going to go fast now, but I'm just trying to show some visual pictures of these hubs in this larger maritime landscape. Macau and Guangzhou definitely, right from the Tang on, it was maritime with the trade. And then Macau came into the picture in the 16th, 17th century with the Portuguese settlement. So that's again, you see very Western elements combined with Chinese elements or Cantonese elements. And then this is just, I think, the visual images speak for themselves. And then Guangzhou and the world trade. So by the 18th and 19th century, you definitely saw Guangzhou being very, very hooked as the world factory. The Shishanhang, the 13 factories, the Hangshan. So there's all sorts of trade. And so when people talk about China as world factory today, I mean, they are centuries behind. In fact, a good friend of mine, Amitav Ghosh, wrote in his trilogy, Ibis trilogy, on this whole area. And he gave a talk for us at Hong Kong University a few years ago. And he said, you know, when he was growing up in Calcutta, you know, he talked about the Chinese influence, but he said it's really not Sinicization. It's not 中国化, it's Cantonization. Because all the connections were coming from southern China and Guangzhou. And so it was quite fascinating to talk to him about again, you know, these connectedness through these multi-ethnic populations. His literature was particularly focused on a class of people called Lascar. They were sailors. They're basically sailors, not the sepoys, but they were the sailors who were going with the boats, you know, from the Gulf area through the Indian Ocean, Southeast Asia, into China and into southern China and back. And in fact, these Lascars were very multi-ethnic. They are Africans, Tamils, Malays, Chinese, Arabs, and so on. And so I was always, you know, I asked Amitav, I said, well, you know, during a storm across the Indian Ocean in the 18th, 19th century, you know, what dialect or what language would the captain speak to get the, you know, to get these sailors to work together to ride the storm? I have no idea. But in Hong Kong today, you would still see street names, you know, Molo Gai, you know, Molo Jie, you know, Molo Jie in Chinese, it's, in English is Lascar Road. Molo, you know, but it's a Portuguese, you know, Molo is actually a Portuguese term, but it's a popular name for these Lascar, these Indian Ocean sailors, multi-ethnic. And then in the mid-levels, if people, how many of you are very familiar with Hong Kong Island? No? There's an escalator going from the very, you know, sort of upper middle class neighborhoods down to the downtown. And in the middle, there's a temple, there's a mosque, which is called, you know, 现在 is called Qing Zhen Si. Yeah. But in fact, historically, in the 19th century, it was created by a Parsi merchant from Bombay, Mumbai, and the title, the name of the temple is called Lascar Temple. So that whole Indian Ocean trade was very much shared by these hubs, you know, Macau, Hong Kong, Canton, or whatever. And so this is the 13th factory, I would say, in Guangzhou, the merchants. They were trading everything with the Chinese comprador. So they have, you know, the Qing dynasty at the time would assign certain big merchants to trade with the foreign merchants. And if you look, you know, the foreign merchants, I mean, 13, they represent all very different European countries. So these were the Chinese counterparts who were very, very wealthy. And then these were the trade they did. Tea was particularly important. And then these were like wallpaper export from Canton. But these are not made for the Chinese market. They were commissioned by European traders to you know, for the European market, but made in Canton. So these are some of them, you know, again. But the interesting thing about these items is that there's quite a cultural fusion. I mean, these are European-style teaware, but with a kind of an Oriental touch, for sure. This one is for an Arab, obviously somebody who's from the Middle East or Southeast Asia, with the Arabic. These were chinoiserie. That's a very European fashion at the time, okay, made in Canton. And so, but these are trade, but you could also see foreign trade in daily life. These were the medium of exchange, Mexican silver dollars, minted by very different mints all over the world. And then my question is, how would they know that these are true silver dollars or whether they are faked? If you go into the left upper corner, you see one of them with some Chinese words, I found that in a coin store in Hong Kong. I went into the store and I said, "Give me the ugliest ones," and the seller said, "Why would you like those ugly ones?" Because everybody would like those beautiful, untouched silver coins. I said, "Well, just give me the ugliest ones," because those were the chops of native banks in Hong Kong to certify that that coin has 76% of silver to a tael of silver. I mean, so that's, they really, 把他们的怎么说，把他们的名姓压下去了，就是。And so, one is made in the U.S., the other in Japan, and then the third one is in Mexico before the Spanish, before independence. So, I mean, there was this very, very mixed medium, and people were using that for trade. But there's more than trade. This is a temple in the western part of the Pearl River Delta, where, in the temple renovations, the stone stele, people were contributing to the temple with these silver dollars. So this is not just for trade, it's daily life. And again, these are the very elaborate ancestral halls in the Pearl River Delta, and one time during the fieldwork, Ke Dawei, David Ford, pointed to the figure there. He said, "Helen, do you see this?" And I said, "What?" There was the two. I don't have the pointer. The two figures, decorating the front entrance of these elaborate ancestral halls. They were Dutch. So David Ford was very, very smart in actually catching that. I was just walking right through without knowing. But anyway, so let's come a little bit back to Hong Kong. So we have talked about Canton, we've talked a little bit about Macau, and then Hong Kong and the British Empire. See, Hong Kong, the British Empire did not just bring the Brits to Hong Kong. It brought a lot of other populations and ethnicities. So Hong Kong, historically, from day one was an urban Western experience. And the merchants' quarters, Hong Kong included, goes right across the interracial region. This is Canton, the 13 factories in the early 19th century. It was all burnt down in 1822, actually, and never rebuilt. But then there were similar architecture. This is downtown Hong Kong in the late 19th century. You could see the Mughal and the European style buildings, St. John's Cathedral, and then so on. And where is this? That's Kaiping. That's in the heart of the Pearl River Delta. And these houses were built by merchants who made their fortunes probably in Southeast Asia and came back in the early 20th century and built themselves huge mansions. Not the Chinese-style village house you saw in the front, but those were very Mughal, Muslim kind of architecture. And then similarly, these are the merchant houses in Kaiping, in the Pearl River Delta. And these were built because this is the best protection from bandits. You can shoot from the top. My subtitle actually gave away where it is. It's again heart of the Pearl River Delta in the Zhongshan County, Shiqi, downtown. Macau, similar. Where is this? This is Parsi Mansions, right behind the Taj Hotel in Mumbai. So, I mean, you really see a shared merchants architecture. I mean, you could see those in Regent Street, London, for that matter. And then, oh, that's the Lasker Mosque I was telling you about in the heart of Hong Kong today. It's still being used. So let's hop very quickly to the modern era. I don't have much. I'm going to rush. So I'm just saying that a lot of the connections are still happening, but in a modern version. You see, Nanfang, Hong Kong, you know, daily flights from, you know, Guangzhou to the Gulf, to Lagos, to Africa, you know. And then this is a picture I took during dawn in my hotel window. That's Doha, Qatar. It was beautiful. But then you see similar. These were advertisements for Wenzhou, you know, investors to buy real estate in Dubai. There they were. Of course, these were all built by Chinese construction companies too. And so they were bought by Chinese investors today in Dubai. And then, of course, in Dubai, you have the Chinese Chinatown, you know, with all sorts of real estate and other investing. And then, of course, you know, at the Dubai airport, you see lots of Chinese technicians. You know, in 2007, when I visited Dubai the first time, there were multi-ethnic labor hierarchy. You know, the European, the Brits, and the Americans were top, and then you go to, then you have the Indian engineers and technicians, and then gradually down, you know, you get the Filipino, and then the Chinese merchants, and then at the bottom you get the North African laborers and Bangladeshi laborers and so on. So you did, you know, I did see a labor hierarchy, but after the financial crisis in 2008, you know, when I went back in 2009, there was nobody left but the Chinese. So, but there's also very soft power still visible there. I was fascinated by this picture I took in a market in Muscat in Oman. You know, again, part of this Inter-Asia region. And of course, all the goods were made in India and China, and then all the models were very European faces, and so on. And it's sold to an Arab population. And this I told too. There was the only women's university in Dubai, and they had a Japan night. And there was, I mean, this beautiful cultural fusion, and totally natural. Then it was. And so, I mean, the soft power, you know, you could think about what soft power there is, but definitely, I mean, these two pictures really show that. So let's move quickly on to China's, you know, Yilu, all the way to Africa. And again, it's, you know, my take on China-Africa literature today is that most of the literature will talk about China-Africa, and they miss the whole region, Inter-Asia region in between. And I think, you know, for analytically, you know, a research project to give both China and Africa the attention it deserves, the Asia part needs to be put back in. Here, it was in Zanzibar in a museum, and one look at the ceramic, I knew it was 18th century Qianlong period, Guangcai. It's made in Guangzhou. It was in a Zanzibar museum. And then, of course, in a more recent investment, 1960s, 70s, China, you know, in the name of friendship for socialist brotherhood, they built the Tanzan Railroad for Tanzania and Zambia. Of course, it's hardly, you know, it's in complete disrepair today. And then these were the Mao stadiums built, again part of the infrastructure that China was doing in the spirit of socialist friendship during the 70s and the 80s. And of course today, huge trade fairs, but if you look, the organizers were still southern China provinces, or coastal China provinces. Not as much, sort of the land-based, Central Plains kind of Hunan kind of provinces. I mean, still very, very coastal. And then medical delivery services, but this is now no longer friendship, but these are not free. I mean, it's actually run by a Chinese family for profit. And then experimental farms. I was quite alarmed, actually, because what they were growing for experiment, supposedly in the name of helping African farmers, but they had like winter melons and all sorts. I mean, they're basically, I guess that these farms were trying to figure out whether these commodities could be grown commercially for Chinese farms to be exported to the world. So it's really not aimed for the African farmers. Because actually, it confirmed my fear, actually. After visiting the experimental farm, we took a shortcut back to Dar es Salaam. And Angela, our friend Angela Liang Qizhi教授, was the first to spot this from the bus. And said, look, and then we saw this. And immediately we went to the web and found that this is a company from Chongqing. And the experimental farm was also Chongqing based. And we talked to some of the villagers, and they told us that the Chinese already bought miles and miles and miles of this land just around that area, together with a road, a very well-built road, and also power line and all that. It was basically, my guess, I haven't done the research to say, but my guess is that is the whole region now acquired by Chinese investors, to create large-scale commercial farming for the world market. So these are some of the roads. We did go to one of the, on the way, we visited a company, Zhongtie, Chinese rail. They were building these roads, and we made the excuse of needing to go to find a toilet, right? And so, the guards, with the AK-47 were sort of a little bewildered that this small busload of multi-ethnic, men and women, we have Angela with me, and then foreigners, whatever, looking for a toilet, in the middle of nowhere. So they let us in, but of course there were no female toilets, because it's all male. And so they had to drive away all the men and then, and then let us use it. But in the meantime, we were able to talk to the Chinese foreman, very sweet guy from Chongqing, Chengdu, Chongqing, southwest. And because I was asking him, I said, when they were building these roads, which is right across Maasai country, I mean, these are not just farmland, but also grazing land. We said, did you encounter any conflicts with people objecting? Because you were just demolishing everything along the way. And the poor chap, this is such a gentle voice, he said, of course, 就是跟我们在中国一模一样啊。So what could I say? So it wasn't without conflict, all these projects, infrastructure projects. I'm going to skip, because time is very short. But coming back from this China-Africa encounter, we saw a lot, at the height of about 10 years ago, there were 100,000 Africans in Guangzhou alone. So I'm just going to flip the images quickly. In the Guangzhou city, they were producing these goods for the African market. IT, IT. And this is strange. I mean, these are African cloth produced in China for the African market. These were the Africans, I mean, mainly from Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, so Francophone, Anglophone, Muslims and Christians with their Chinese workers. So this is just a normal street in that area in Guangzhou. And of course, people were buying not only goods but also services. And just look at the different languages. That tells you something about their climate. And African restaurants and daily life. And this is the Sacred Heart Cathedral, the biggest remaining one in China today. And on a Sunday afternoon, just go anytime, you would see a sea of African traders and their family. And this was built in 1867 by the French missionaries. And, and the African traders are not poor. And they mix with, the Chinese counterparts and so on. And so the last bit, about a dozen or so slides, I would like to show this kind of historical global Hong Kong and the cultural bricolage typical of this region. Like we talked about the Yang Jijing, that Long Yingtai was mentioning. We talk about the landscape of power in downtown Hong Kong. So you see the St. John's Cathedral and HSBC, and then of course Li Ka-shing's flagship headquarters. In the street signs, this is a typical urban anthropology. Street signs, you see all sorts of historical layers just from the names. Of course, there's still the traditional Chinese power base. That is the Donghua Hospital that Dr. Elizabeth Sin writes a lot about. The alternative, Hong Kong government during the colonial era. And again, just in buildings, you could see the bricolage architectural style. Of course, the new landscape of power, that's the Bank of China. Sharp and cutting into HSBC for sure, feng shui-wise, and HSBC still stood okay, but the Lipo Center across the road just collapsed. So Southeast Asia money just wasn't, matched for the Chinese capital. But Hong Kong remains, I think, today, a very cosmopolitan place so far, with a lot of mobilities and cultural fusion and ethnic encounters and new gender spaces and I think that's really worth mentioning. You see in a normal Sunday afternoon, the 350,000 Indonesian and Filipino maids, each finding their own very harsh labor conditions, but also their own culture space. These were Indonesian maids on a Sunday afternoon holiday. Are they objects out of place? Of course not. They are human agents themselves. And they're experimenting their own identities in a city space we call Hong Kong. And this I would have used for my third volume of Asia Inside Out, but I sent it to my editor at Harvard, and she just turned it down in like 3 seconds. I was standing in front of this store selling Victoria's Secrets, and I saw a lot of people passing through. And then this Indonesian person with her whatever stood there and then took a selfie of herself. I mean, I'm sorry I could not let you see her faces, but that face was just amazing. And I thought, it tells me everything about Asia inside out, about new alternative spaces, and about the making of new identities and gender. but anyway, it got turned down, so we use a different picture. Now, gender space. Again, Hong Kong was, actually a very important hub for the new style 20th century Cantonese opera, where gender crossing was just very, very totally accepted. And I don't know if people know who, they're very, very famous, the women's very famous women Cantonese opera singer, but the male person is actually 反串的那个是何韵诗. It's the pop, Canto pop singer, Denise Ho. And there, cross-dressing, there's very, very, a lot of new gender nuances. And she did some Cantonese opera classics like Butterfly Lovers and Jia Bao Yu, where she played the boy, the man's role. And of course, it won her fans both in both genders, let's put it that way. But the Cantonese culture, the performance culture was very, very porous and open in that sense. There's her again. And I showed that just recently in Beijing and got away with this. Because if you know, because of her political activism, her Yunshi has been banned in China, so everything's off the shelf. I was showing it in Beida and I was showing it in Tsinghua, but I was talking about gender and big business. She was, in her earlier life, she was modeling for Louis Vuitton and other French, big cosmetic companies because she can speak English and French and Mandarin and she's very well tuned here as well, and even sang a few Thai songs. But in her earlier times, she was, doing this. And I think big companies like Louis Vuitton and others, so long as the fashion sell, it doesn't matter whether it's LGBT or. So I was really trying to make a point that for Hong Kong, being a hub for a lot of big business and fashion and consumption market, it sort of coincidentally make them rather progressive. Same, this is Marie Claire, this is a Taiwan magazine. And her gender images changed. From very androgynous to very women-like. And this is very, very sad, but also revealing. This is Lu Kai Tong, very, I think she's much more known here in Taiwan than Hong Kong, who committed suicide last year. A very close friend of He Yunshi. But here, the picture, it's an advertisement for Zhou Sheng Sheng Jewelry. I don't know if people have heard of Zhou Sheng Sheng Jewelry, a huge Asian jewelry chain. And they used her and her talk about real love and her same-sex union with the Taiwanese photographer. And so, Zhou Sheng Sheng, I know the family, they're pretty conservative, but for the market, they'll do this. And HSBC, they would advertise for same-sex insurance. And this was the ultimate, I was walking downtown Hong Kong at the headquarters of HSBC, the world's one of the biggest banks, and it was over a court case that an executive, bank executive, her partner was denied a residence visa in Hong Kong, and so she challenged the Hong Kong government all the way to the High Court and won. And HSBC and many other big business, banks particularly, were so afraid that their high-end human resource would be discouraged for coming to Hong Kong. And so they had this rainbow color icon of HSBC lion just in solidarity. So there it is. I took that myself, so it's real. I didn't take it, and so there it was. So, last bit, I have to show this. Cantopop, again, now has it's no longer just for consumption and for the market, for the Chinese diaspora. This has become new political space, and I can definitely see that in Denise Ho's own songs and her activism. Let me just, I'm not sure how to. That's just a 1-minute trailer of a documentary film on the umbrella movement. And so a lot of the stuff that's happening today originated from this.
Next chief executive in 2017.
That's Martin
We're now
Lee.
told, yes, you guys get a one person, one vote at the election. But Beijing effectively will be able to pick all the candidates for you.
That's for sure wrong. Occupy Central. And then this is not last week, it was 2014. The police only threw 80-some tear gas. Denise Ho singing in the background. So these were the kids. These are some of the singers. Denise Ho.
We have not won. We could not get what we want. But at the same time, we did not lose.
He's now in jail. So, but this is the power of music. Then Denise Ho, after she supported the umbrella movement, was censored by China, and then the French cosmetic company dropped her. And so she did something extraordinary. Just another minute. So she held a street concert. I went thinking that there would be a dozen or so people, and in fact, the thousands just clogged the streets. So to hear her, and my question at the time was saying that these were not teenage fans for popular music. These were people as old as I am, and then 老中青都有. And so I said, what did the Hong Kongers see in her and in her music? That's the problem. So. Because of the time, I'm going to cut this short. And then she was able to perform a few more very, very big concerts of 50,000 people in Hong Kong, but no corporate sponsors. So she did it by crowdfunding. 300 small businesses put her back on stage. There it was, symbol of defiance now.
I肯定呢一個係香港最團結嘅一個演奏會。
You could see the audience there. So she's really using the popular music as a front for political activism. she went all over the world because now the China market was shut off from her. She came here last year, Taipei, Taichung, and I think Kaohsiung. And this is London. I just want to show you how these Hong Kongers can reach the world. She's singing Bohemian Rhapsody at Regent's Park, London.
Look up to the skies and see.
Perfect English.
I'm just a poor girl. I need no sympathy. 'Cause I'm easy come, easy go. Little high, little low. Anyway the wind blows, doesn't really matter to me. Just kill a man, put a gun against his head, from my tree now he's dead. Reality.
So I have to cut short these. I took this, standing on two chairs at the side of the stage with my iPhone. So pardon the poor quality. But this too, she was doing this December, just a few months ago in Hong Kong. And this time she really experimented with high tech. I mean, I thought she really put Cantopop into the 21st century. But again, with very, very powerful political messages and socially aware messages on like the environment and so on. And she sings in the, of course, in Mandarin too. So the last one is on the environment. This is again like a few seconds of this. And there's a completely different image. And just look at the backdrop, the kind of screen that she's using. So, these are the Hong Kongers, worldly, cosmopolitan, multilingual, refusing, I think, to have a society that to be eroded by a very land-based, authoritarian regime at this point. I think that's probably a large part of explaining what's happening today on the Hong Kong streets today. And and these people are very creative. I think, they know that it's like a David and Goliath situation. In fact, I was talking to a very prominent lawyer in Hong Kong, Margaret Ng, at the Yale Law School in 1997. My colleague asked her, well, after 1997, when 香港回归中国, what do you think about, the situation in Hong Kong? And she said, well, it's like David and Goliath, but without the sling. And 2017, I invited Denise Ho to Yale to have a conversation, a public conversation with me, and I asked her specifically. I said, Margaret said this. I said, Denise, as a creative performer, where you can reach a lot of young, tech-savvy Asian all over the world, I said, where is your sling? She said, music. To be creative, to vent, to be able to attract the world attention to this, then David would not be alone. So that's sort of I've been watching her developed into this kind of a Hong Konger, and I thought with more and more Hong Kongers in this kind of a framework, taking into account these multiple layers of history that we need to understand more academically, I think that's where Hong Kong's future lies. Thank you very much. It's long, but I thought that this is sort of fun to play with.
好，那我想刚刚我们都肖老师给我们一个非常丰富的一趟人类学之旅，对，我们看到了一个很长的时间片段，也看到了所谓的山跟海这样子的，看到空间的一个构成，其实是一个流动的，然后也看到了文化的混合。那这个珠江流域，除了从老师1970年代进入的一个广州的一个乡下这样子的一个开始一直到拉到比较长的一个时间脉络，看到闽南的文化的一个形成。然后最后他们拉到了我想老师在美国教书很多年30多年，可是其实香港对他始终是一个很重要的一个地方所以刚刚在一开始他就跟我说，他会从香港开始的，然后从香港结束。那后来的片子是让老师给我们看了很多陈医师的一个记录对。然后刚刚在谈话才知道，其实这是一个他新的一个学术的另外一种的一个学术的阐述这样。好，那这是一个非常难得的一个经验，跟我们直接只在读老师的一个作品其实非常不同的一个印象。好，那人文大师下午茶其实它有一个想法，其实是希望能够有资深的一个学者跟年轻的学者能够展开一些对话这样。那因此我们在这一次的整个筹备的过程中，其实我们邀请了10位的一个助理教授或者是年轻的副教授来参与这一次的一个对话。那所以我们有那个 Professor Colin Ward，from 政治 University， 然后有张振恒老师，台大人类学系，黄淑丽，他们要来。那另外就是赵宗启老师，他们从暨南大学来，然后另外刘子凯老师从政治大学，刘玉山他从暨南大学，以及Professor 谢丽跟Ophelia Seneca， 然后谢爱伦老师他清华大学是考古学的背景，对，那所以我们现在就会先请看学者们的对话人对。然后赵宗启老师我是漏掉了，从暨南大学。好，那恩姐，我以为你没有来欧华中，对，赵恩姐老师对，跟蔡燕玲老师是好朋友，对。那燕玲今天本来可以来，后来有一些事情。那恩姐是中山大学社会学系的。好，那接着我们是不是就让就几位老师们可以来提问一下。对，我们那不然就是从玉山开始好了。
好，先谢谢夏老师刚刚的演讲。
然后就是真的是看到了非常丰富的尤其是关于就是从一个区域，然后到整个区域再思考这个就是 place making 的这个部分。那我当初写下来的这个提问，其实有一个就是因为 最近这几年其实听到了非常多，或者是自己也参与了一些关于区域研究的一个讨论，尤其是在人类学的这个学术讨论里面。那我想就是想要很好奇，就是不知道老师在参与就是过去关于珠江三角洲的这个研究里面，其实它也是一个新的区域的一个视野，就是从一个流域的这个角度来思考，就是人文地理的这个部分。那不知道老师在这样子的一个过去的参与里面，对于就是人类学的这个区域研究的发展，然后包括它可能面临的一些困境或者是挑战，有没有一些的心得或是观察？就是包括到底我们在重新思考这个区域研究的时候，它有可能有哪些的新的角度，或者是从人类学的一个观点，或者人类学的一个思考里面，它有没有可能可以突破过去在做区域研究的一个方式？就是除了可能我刚刚有提到是从历史人类学的这个部分来看，那因为区域研究其实有一些的可能会有一些或者很多人在讨论的一些困境，那想听他老师的这个心得跟意见。
这个问题问得很好，这个也是我们一起这几十年在想。因为你看我70年在香港念书的时候，我跟是Skinner的部分，那个时候还是非常传统的，虽然Skinner完全不是传统的，就是整个大环境 anthropology 是还是比较传统的，就是那个时候也是刚刚开始，人类学是给了很多那个欧洲的那些社会理论的冲击，所以我们当学生的时候就是非常幸运，就是说我们学到的传统的一个 solid 的那个 foundation， 就是也就是有的冲击去再往前走。就是对我来讲，最要紧的就是Marx和Weber这三个人。就是当然了，80年代也是Weber， 就是整个人类学去Weberian turn， 这个是非常重要的，就是因为说你看很多时候那个整个20世纪的那个社会科学都是比较bounded 有界限的 structure 嘛，就看 bounded， 也同时了也是比较static， 就是那个不只是空间是 bounded， 时间也是 bounded， 所以他这样的话就是拿到那些时空都没有动态的categories， 然后去做很多 quantitative 的分析，所以这个完全是20th century social science， 可是 Weber 这就是这样，所以那个 Weberian turn in anthropology 影响了我们整代人，那么就是重新把那个时空怎么去 recombine， 这个来说明我们的那个 anthropology 的 topic 那个 subject 是什么。那么变成了当然了很多时候也是我们看的社会的也变得很快，就是 especially 科技什么的。可是很多时候那个传统的思考还是说有2个3个什么的 static 的东西，然后看他们怎么互动，然后有变。可是我们这想法，我跟我的华南报道那个想法刚刚相反，就是说you don't start with structures, you end with structures。怎么说了？就是说，实在很多现实都是非常复杂的 process， 可是那些 process 一直都在互动。可是为什么到了某一种时刻，那个互动变成一个非常强力的structure？这个就是 power。那么，所以我们 historical anthropology 就是说，我们怎么把人他们是一个文化的人，是经济人，是政治人，是很多历史人，他们怎么一方面给那个社会的结构影响， 也同时他们去 exert 他们的 agency 的时候，也在创造另外的 structure。这个是一个 process 嘛，一直是变动的。那么每个人都这样做的话，那么为什么社会到底还是有某一种 structure 是占了上方，其他的就给 silence 了？那个就是跟 power 有关。所以我们说，很多时候我们只看那些完全是一直在变的那些不同的 layer 的 process， 在看的时候，还是要看到底有什么那个 externalized 的 power 跟 internalized 的 power 不够变成一点 lasting 的 structure 有 significance。这个就是我们一直用来去研究所有现在很多变的一直在变的phenomenon也好，不变的也好。那么我们的学生一做研究的时候，第一步就是说，不要 start with structure。You have to understand why what you're watching end up with certain dominant structures of power。这个是比较理论性的去回答你的问题。就是说 historical anthropology， 我跟一个团队的历史的柯德威的也他们台湾帮的，我们华南帮的就是一直就是一开始就是用历史的那个 annals school French annals school， 然后一直做很多的那个就是看那些历史是有 meaning 的。是有 meaningful people to make history， 所以就是把人就是推到最前面然后就是很多 unexpected 的 structural consequence， 所以我们一开始就是这样，就是把20世纪的很多那些 social science 反过来。那么当然呢，做了70年代我一个人跑田野。80年代，跟柯达威、陈春生、吕志伟他们跑田野。那么90年代就是跟他们的学生也跑田野。现在都很多人。所以开始的时候，人家说我们是一个非常后现代的那个改历史的，就是我说我们是华南方，可是我们不认得，我们的眼界完全不只是华南方。这个是一个 methodology 的一个探讨那么现在我想，人家说那个你越学派，所以我们说我们升格了，所以还在继续下去。我们现在觉得最要紧的就是下一代年轻的学者那个 young scholars 跟他们的 advanced graduate student就是跟我们一起在把我们做的事情继续下去。这个是根本就是一个非常一个根本的 challenge to regional studies or even community studies that is so core to anthropology. So 我们说你要研究中国的话，人家说 What is your tribe？ 我说哎呀，我的 tribe 很大，怎么 study？ 所以我们就重新去想一个是20世纪、21世纪，现在你要把那个全球都看到，也要把那个 region 也看到，也把 locality 也看到，一场场好，你用什么的一个方法去做？这还是归根到底是一个方法论的。
谢谢。我的问题是关于这个本土多大，我可能用英文，因为我刚才想这个问题，所以我可能比较快可以。I guess the question is sort of the geography of north-south, because you're sort of trying to advance this idea of sort of a north-south axis, to kind of decenter this east-west kind of axis. You used to talk about, say, for example, Hong Kong. But then I guess the obvious question is, say, how big is Bentu is sort of the question. Of course, is it a geographical division or is it more of a division of practice? So for example, if we're doing the north-south division, how far does it extend? You mentioned Fujian at some points. Quanzhou would be an obvious part of this cosmopolitan world, but also you could go further up, Zhejiang. But of course, if you look at Wenzhou's development or Zhejiang's development, a lot more Bantu capital, less foreign capital coming in. So is that also part of the south? I mean, where does the south end? Where does the north begin? But it goes further, especially when you then begin to go south out of Hong Kong into the Indian Ocean to the Swahili coast. And then it becomes a question of, when you're in Tanzania, the traces of the socialist period, Sino-Tanzanian socialist friendship. But is that also part of that cosmopolitan world that you described in the beginning, or is that a parallel kind of relationship? And I kind of wonder, because it comes ultimately to the question of Yi Dai Lu, is sort of the question of who owns it. I kind of get a sense that there's sort of almost like a reclaiming that's going on in some of the talk of trying to reclaim Yi Dai Lu for Hong Kong in particular. I would like to hear more about that. But sort of the question really of where is North-South another way of talking about the state and sort of non-state cosmopolitanism? I mean, it's sort of an open-ended question, but I'm sensing like a sort of a pattern of starting to reimagine the geography. But I'm kind of wondering what the boundaries of those geographies are, as to whether they're geographical boundaries or whether they're more sort of orientation kind of. If that makes sense. Sort of where state power exists or where state power is sort of is not there. And I'm just wondering if you might be able to expand on that.
You just wrote about a dozen questions. Let me question. Let me try to unlayer them a little. Ultimately, at a very basic level, I would say, 一个空间一个 space, geographical or political or economic space, has to be matched and coordinated with a time space. So 那个时空分开，时间越长，空间越大。So that nexus is crucial, and the interaction of 时空 defines what a region is. So they are definitely not just a physical region, because it can involve a lot of very soft values, and even if you talk about infrastructure, people always talk about hardware, infrastructure, right? Hardware, the bridges, the roads, the railways. But I talk about finance, 也是 infrastructure. 可是这个 finance 都是已经是非常 soft 的，是制度的，是人为的，是 value 的，是 morality 的。这个 infrastructure 是另外的一回事。所以最好就是 don't start your question with a certain physical category, but to see how the physical and the non-physical constantly, recombine at particular historical moments of power and right? I mean, we were talking, before the talk. I said, my group of colleagues in Michigan did a conference on China, Africa, and countries. And I said, oh, you talk about China, you talk about Africa, two continental entities, but you miss the whole level in between, right? And if you add those in between, then it cannot be physical. So I wrote a paper on how China finances all its African investments today. And my site did not end up in China or Africa, but in Hong Kong. So totally unexpected. And I think it's the kind of a new mindset, so that you can really look at, again, objects or places out of place to figure out what are the crucial gelling points to make those processes work. So it can be hard at times, it can be soft at times. So it all depends 就那个时空就是分开的。I don't know if I'm using a very abstract way to answer you, but to make it a concrete question about whether we are trying to reclaim 一带一路 from the recent rhetoric from China. Yes, for sure. And the reason, the tools I have to reclaim it is to go back to the layers of history to see how this 空间, this space has been so, enriched and with these historical layers, and they could become resources to either to engage China positively or negatively. It depends. It depends on China, and the China entity is also not static. And so we really have to be trying to think about a research design that takes into multiple moving parts. And the real strategy is to say what parts became most crucial to explain what you see at those moments in time. It will switch eventually. And the same, if you think about 一带一路, that's one larger region that incorporates all the way from China to Africa. And you think about which part of China will be more engaged, right? So my part of China in the maritime world and with much more, historical connections might not be the same as those 一带一路, like Xinjiang or Tibet or Hunan or whatever, that will go much more northwest, right? With a very different configuration. Whereas in the south, it may be another one. And then we talk about Wenzhou, well, throw in Shanghai. Both of those cities have become, Wenzhou is different, it's global. But Shanghai is very, very domestic, actually. It serviced China's domestic economy in the last 60 years, basically. So it shrank from a global center to a much more state-centered city. So I would not include Shanghai in my, maritime region. Not because it's not on the coast, but it is its function. So in that sense, I think all I could do is to say that be flexible in your analytical categories. Be very careful with when you look at whatever categories you choose to use to build your research, that you take care of the historical layers and that you appreciate the human agency that come with those historical layers. I think that will get us a little farther. And on the China ethics stuff, we can talk about that later.
我是赵安姐，好，谢谢邵老师给我们的演讲。因为其实那个主办单位有要求我们先提问嘛，然后我提了3个问题，第一个是跨境族群的历史，尤其是南亚跟东南亚在广州。然后第2个问题我是写非洲商人在广东，然后第3个我是写珠江流域与伊斯兰。然后我觉得老师今天都回答很多，就是提供了很多非常就是很直接是我提出的那些东西。有非常棒的展现哦，就是让我们看到说文化的本质就是不断的混合跟这个流动。然后我其实也很高兴老师可以提到阿米卡寇熊，因为我是他的忠实粉丝，而且我都是读英文的，很认真的把那些后书啃。然后因为刚才我们讲到那个拉斯加尔，因为他那个其实如果是阿拉伯文或是那个波斯文的话，其实都是士兵或是军队的意思。但是在 British India 的那个 context 里面 ，Lascar 就是那些 soldier。可是那些 sailors， 对，但是他们有时候会变成是那个佣兵，因为比方说在那个鸦片战争的时候，就是我跟大家分享这小说，就是鸦片战争其实死掉最多人，既不是清朝的人，也不是英国的军队，而是英国从孟加拉、从印度带过去的那些就是 Bengali soldiers， 然后他们有一些人是从 那一些 sailor 里面再买出去的。所以它就是像老师刚才讲那样，它是一个非常流动混合的世界，而且他们那个时候其实在广东还有很多地方，其实就有很多留下一些遗迹啊，然后包括那些清真寺的。那我其实，在提这个问题的时候，我就一直在想象说，到底要怎么做我刚才提的那些东西的计划。我就是天哪，这真的太困难了，就要会好多东西，然后很多种。比方说，假设我要研究这个广州的这个奈及利亚商人的 community 我就要会好的，我要会奈及利亚的历史，然后又要会广州的历史，然后又要会不同的语言什么的。然后我就想，天啊，我到底要怎么样？我自己是不会去做这件事，做这个 project， 因为我现在自己就我自己目前做的比较多的还是跟印尼学者和马来西亚的这个合作，因为我主要还是 base 在这个海洋东南亚上面哈。但我就在想说，因为学生他们常常。我不知道怎么鼓励学生去做，像我刚才讲的，比方说广州的奈及利亚商人社，因为他们会自动的跳到吉他，他们觉得比较简单，比较好想象。因为对于那个长期混合的那个本质，还有就是他们要去能够真的深入的做那样子的 project， 其实真的要非常多不一样的训练，历史学的训练、伊斯兰研究，然后去研究人类学研究。那我们甚至没有。他要多少的那个 faculty 才有办法让他去对这个东西展现兴趣，所以就很想知道老师在美国训练学生，或是教导大学部，甚至是研究所要怎么样提醒，就是让他们对这些事情有兴趣，而且想要变成未来的就是这样子 scholars。
这个我们在耶鲁也 struggle 了好久。就是因为我们耶鲁的 anthropology 的系是比较 top down 的，我们那个 PhD student 比我们的学生还要多。那么所以可是因为我的影响呢，很多年轻学生也很喜欢做我这样的题目。当然了，我们第一个就是方点已经有问题。因为所有的 PhD 的那些很多的，不是所有的，很多那个 major funding agencies for PhD dissertation research 还是 regional area focus，East Asia， SSRC， 很多都是这样，就不会跨那个地域的。所以我的学生是可以就是说。这非常幸运，就是耶鲁还是有资源的，所以我们第一步就是把我们的系跟我们的那个 area council 就是扩大一点，先给他们一个 seed funds 然后就是这么样的20,000 US 先给然后他们有了，然后就是做了一点点，然后再去申请一些 national grants， 然后就是不同，有的时候就是申请不同的 area grants， 那个 Japan and Southeast Asia for example， 他们的 Japan Foundation 也申请，那些沙西的申请，有 Southeast Asia 的，这样也去那么就是他们就是比较他们的找基金去 support 是比较困难，可是一般。做这样的这个反思的一些PhD 是也是我们系最好的，所以我现在有3个本来3个，现在2个学生就是研究中非中国非洲就演化了所以他们也要念那个当然了中国有的是从大陆来的，所以中文没问题，可是英文还是还可以。法文要他去拿他在 Congo 做Brazzaville 做还有 local 也有，所以用的时间是比较长一点可是我们还是给他不同的资助去做我第3个学生本来就是研究那个环保，也是中国非洲的，现在还是觉得念太多那个swahili的东西，他跑到西藏去研究练习，我就是好几个月，就是半年的，完全不知道他在做，因为没办法去跟他一出来了，哪怕我去，他就可以跟我所以还是非常困难。
对。
可是还是觉得做，就是因为我觉得我对这些年轻学者非常有信心，因为他们可以真的可以跨国地域，就是把所有我们刚刚说的那些 area study 的那些大型的那个支部重新去思考。我们有一个非常做的比较多的，这是一个 SSRC Social Science Research Council，跟我们从2008年开始，我们组织了好几个学校 ，Singapore and US，我的研究所在香港也有Good，还有几个慢慢加起来 SSRC， 我们就做了一个 consulting， 每1年半。都搞一些很大型的 interracial 的 conference， 每一次都100多人这样的，慢慢就成了气候。就现在SSRC 就加了一点项目，这是专门给那个 postdoc 还有PhD postdoc 的一些资助，就让他们就是跨地域去做这些研究。It takes time。
耶鲁大学都很困难，我们应该大家都会觉得心里好受很多。
你看你做什么 scale 也是可以的，我觉得最要紧就是 convince 你的学生这个是值得去做的，因为这个还是他们以后的 life。
谢谢老师，你的报告很有意思，还是我的中文不好听。ask my question in English. I want to really thank you for this idea of matter out of place, and that what seems like matter out of place is not out of place at all. A lot of my own work is trying to look at climate change and the effects of climate change and what it's doing. And as you were talking, when you said it first, matter out of place, there's something in there. Slowly, you say, carbon is not out of place. It is not out of place. It just got moved by what we were doing. Just like all of the things that you described for us today. They're just moving around, right? People are moving around, and styles of architecture are moving around, and different nodes of power. But with the carbon, it's kind of tricky because, like the god of the sea, it's invisible until it does something really dramatic. And then everyone pays attention to it, right? And so one of the things I was thinking about in this trade region that you show us is that you show us a lot of the nodes of power that are here and clearly involved. In fact, the whole history that you're telling us about the trade back and forth through this area, this is all a part of the movement of carbon from where it was in stuff to where it is now floating about, waiting to do something dramatic and exciting. So we have the big buildings, and we have the HSBC, and we also have the big ships, and we have the trees and the clay moving all about the world. And so I'm wondering, because you're working at this really nice regional scale, and especially at these coastal areas, are you seeing any shifting? Right? Are you seeing anything on the ground that's reacting to some of the shifts in landscape, some of the physical shifts that we are seeing and that we're going to see? And is this changing the power base or changing where centers of action are? I mean, we're seeing something in Hong Kong, right? But so I just would like to ask you if you have any thoughts on that.
I think my story is pretty grim.
Right?
Basically, it's not just Hong Kong. It has to do with the entire China. In its very aggressive push to the globe. I mean, it's already pretty much got the entire African continent. Right? But at the same time, Asia its very immediate frontier. And what it offers to those frontiers are infrastructure, hardware, so that is the worst in terms of the carbon counting, right? And the problem, once you think in those terms, then, again, I don't want to blame China completely, but there are also so many Asian authoritarian regimes, right, that China's, leaders can pretty much talk to each other. The same with Africa, right? The Chinese investors, basically state enterprises, would talk to and work out deals with African leaders, and then things just get pushed down. And for whose benefits, right? So there's a huge amount of language of the state in this kind of global carbon moving in environmental sense. And I think, and this is my way of, that's why I feel that is a very grim picture, because before you have so many, you have multiple actors in very different situations of power and place, and therefore their agenda might not be similar. And so you have mediations, you have counter, you have all sorts of conflicts and so on. So, if something goes wrong, it would not be pushed all the way to the end point efficiently. And so there's mediation. Whereas today, you see a collusion of power among many regimes, China included, with a rather shared goal, so-called development. And it's a state-planned, top-down development. And sometimes these has very little mediation. Even in China, all you could see is great leap forward, and many other of these disasters. And so it really tells you that without mediation, the kind of development that really needs to be, reconsidered. Right? Hong Kong is a perfect example of this grim scenario. The Gautier, now the proposed reclamation of these huge areas to build, for more wealthy people from China to come and resorts and all that, complete ecological disasters and all that. And in order for Hong Kong to be absorbed back into the Dahuanxu, the Greater Bay Area. So these are the kind of reconfigurations of region with a lot of hardware, with a lot of top-down state voices. But you don't hear the grassroots because, according to my colleague Jim Scott, and history according to winners and losers, in this case, until last week, I think Hong Kong is really losing.
Sorry.
谢谢肖老师这么精彩的一个演讲。那我问两个问题啊，就是第一个问题是从今天的，因为老师最新的出版书我没有看，那从今天的一个演讲的 slide 里面，我想问第一个问题是，老师用的 fusion 或者是 hybridity 的概念在形塑香港作为一个地方，所以这个地方的一个定义，或者我们去思考这个一个香港这样的一个地域的概念的时候，是 place-making。可是它这 place-making 的意涵是一个 unresolved、still constantly defining， 叫做 constantly evolving 这样的一个概念。那从这个概念底下，我想去回溯就是老师在谈是从这个影片底下，从一开始也报告底下，让我们看到香港的战中，后来是香港的反送中，到后来的一个所谓的歌手的一个演唱会的演讲，跟你中间这个部分的形塑的所展现那个 hybridity 很不一样。也就是如果我理解的 hybridity 是，如果我们杯子里面有两粒球，一个是全球化，一个是在地化。这个杯子叫香港在全球化在地的力量在搅动当中，可是 hybridity 的概念是最后这两粒球全球化跟在地化沉淀这个杯子底下 sedimentation， 可是它并没有 mix 在一块，也就是说我们看到 hybridity 永远是一个 没有完整的 ，not totally mixed，still have gaps existing。如果是从这个角度来思考的话，是从 gap 的角度来思考的话，那回溯老师的一开始演讲一下，去反思刚才回馈玉生老师的问题，还有就是 Sheridan 的老师的问题的时候提到，那我们如果重新思考一个区域研究，把珠三角洲做一个区域来做跳脱区域研究，把所谓的 inside out 的角度来思考的话，那是不是肖老师想提供的一个思考方式是？这个你刚才演讲里面也提到说，把它做一个 method， 做一个方法，把香港做一个 master。那我要问的问题是，你中间这一段的一个很大部分的这么多图片的呈现的 hybrid 的东西，想要让我们去思考这个区域，香港作为一个区域，想跳出来区域底下做一个 method， 它背后的一个思维是什么？这是第一个一个问题。第二个问题是我知道老师也提到是跟 David Ford 教授有很多的合作啊。David Ford 老师是一个历史学家。那老师是一个人类学家，我想说，作为我们的年轻学者来讲，我们怎么去进行叫跨学科的一种对话，历史学跟人类学的对话？想请老师分享一下，你跟 David Ford 的合作底下，你看到什么东西是从他身上学到的？那怎么进行的跨学科的对话？
时间不多，我就介绍1-2篇文章给你看就是了，好不好？第一篇就是好几年，就是2014年。就是 David Ford 跟刘志伟要我写的，那个时候他们两个就是说，我们华南方那个时候不是我们的，他们叫我们华南方常常给人误解，因为我们只讲那个本地local history 也说我们就是没有理论你就给我们写篇文章，就是把他们那些都干掉。OK， 所以我就写了一篇文章很短的不是 research paper， 就是在
历史人类学的
这个什么something key issues in historical anthropology, a view from South China。那个在那个叶文信跟邢有田他们在 Berkeley 的出版的那个书，key issues in historical anthropology。那个你在网上一click就可以。那么这是 summarize 的，我们一开始就用Annal School 年鉴学派，一直讲到最后的那些 structuring 和什么，就整个理论基础都写。可是从来这个就是整个华南方的 David Ford 怎么说是那个 history 跟 anthropology 的一个 genuine marriage， 就是因为他也不是历史学出身的他 Princeton 的degree是 sociology。所以就是因为我们从头到尾就有一个 shared 的 social theory 的基础，然后才去看 anthropology on one hand 跟 history。所以从19世纪一直到现在，怎么两个一直在变，到了真的去20世纪后期，这两个 discipline 才慢慢就是走在一起。这个也是一个很长的事情，因为一直 anthropology 一直的发展，从19世纪一直到1980年都没有这个历史观。人类历史学了，一直就是讲这个 political history、economic history、social history， 到了最后这个 French cultural history 才开始跟人类学有一个共同的语言。所以这两个 discipline 还是经过了1个世纪。的自己的变化，才慢慢就是在起来。所以我觉得我们很幸运，我这代人就是刚刚学完了再去要当那个年轻的学者教授，那个时候这个 fusion theoretical fusion 对我们来讲就是一个新的开始。所以我想可以回答你的就是这个关于那个 hybridity 跟香港呢，你看我整个 hour 我从来没讲过 hybridity 这个字 ，OK 就是说我们要争取的就是在同一个 experience 怎么可以把 local, regional, national, global 同一时间看出来？不是说已经有了 local or global， 然后看他们的互动，这个已经是错了。这是看我常常给学生一个故事，我说，哎，你们做那个搞 research 那个 design 的时候，这要看第一个礼拜，我的问题就是 what is a site？ 你把那个 site 搞不清楚，你怎么把什么声音放在这个 site 里头，什么声音不要放在？这个已经是个选择。What is a site? Secondly, where are the voices？ 这个很重要的，那个 site 怎么去定啊？不是一个 village， 不是一个工厂，不是什么，那些都是既定的嘛。你要自己把你的那个 research site， 就是跟你的主题要有关系，所以这个是非常重要的。我说，就是想象你know imagine yourself like a little dog， 来你要去那个 forest 去 explore 你一到一个树你就 you raise your little leg and do something right？ You understand what I'm saying？ 这样的话 you know then you will find your way home and then you will know your idea of the forest。这个 forest 呢会变的，那个the seasons 会变，可是你要 capture the seasons 的话，你要懂那个 the shape of the forest， the nature of the trees and the color of the leaves all at once。慢慢想一想。
不好意思，我要扮演这个程咬金，半路杀出来，以免最后变成压轴，但是轮过来。因为我的研究的兴趣是民族主义，那所以我的兴趣会比较在当代这个闽南文化圈里一些政治上的议题，特别是香港跟澳门之间的一些微妙的关系。我在2015年的时候曾经去香港跟澳门采访这个大珠三角地区的所谓的认同的一种建构跟流动。那当时听到一个很有趣的说法是。澳门在面对香港的时候都有矮人一截的这样子一种心态，他们有说法是大香港小澳门。那他们在求学的过程中，教科书是香港过来的，影剧产业呢都是从香港过来的。他们甚至连学生到台湾来念书，因为大家不清楚澳门是什么地方，因为两岸三地只会讲到香港，所以呢，为了不让人家知道他不是来自于中国大陆，他干脆直接讲说我是来自香港。那这是第一个我当时听到一个现象。那第二个现象是在2014年的雨伞革命跟这一次的这个反送中条例，那我们很清楚的看到是香港它对于政治自主的这一个追求，声音是远远大过于澳门。那就后者这一点来讲，一个通常的说法是说，1966年的123事件之后呢，发生在澳门的123事件之后呢，整个澳门已经被左派所把持，那国民党的势力也是被根除掉。从那个时候呢，澳门基本上就已经是左派的社会。但这个相反的是，香港的这个港英政府呢，1967年的这个67事件，虽然说也是造成了这个左右之间的一个非常大的冲突，可是呢，港英政府仍然能够有效的控制香港。再来呢，葡澳政府呢，它的治理是一个失败的治理。导致了这个澳门的人呢，对于这个殖民政府没有什么好感。那港英政府在香港带来的是所谓的法治，更加上后来的这个廉政公署的成立等等，这是我们通常听到的说法。可是呢，光仅仅是这个样子，我仍然感到很好奇的是，有没有其他一些更深层的原因，造成了今天这个香港跟澳门两者之间的关系会如此微妙？然后呢，香港在政治自主权的这个追求上面，也远远会高过于澳门，让澳门几乎是听不到声音这个样子。
这个问题也是我常常现在想的问题，因为你要有一个 what have we missed in the narrative that you were talking about 关于香港澳门的分别。我觉得第一个分别就是两个不同的 colonial background。那个 Portuguese colonial background 跟那个 British colonial background， 现在还看得到，这是一个法治，一个 professionalism。那个 Portuguese colonialism in the 16th century gave Macau a very, very different cultural landscape and institutional landscape. 现在还有， all you need to do is to go and try to buy or sell a real estate in Macau, and you will see that the legal system is still very medieval. It's like Middle Ages. Whereas in Hong Kong, is very different. It's the British common law tradition. So the law is a very basic issue about how Hong Kong can still stand with a lot of the world resources around it, whereas up in, there's nothing else. So that is the first level, the legal institutions and the colonial background. The second, I think, this has to do with the scale and the variety of the economy. For a long time, Macau really was still very much a medieval economy. I'm sorry to say, and then now today it's just casinos and all that. So there's very little else. Whereas in Hong Kong, it went through layers of economy, from a trading port to an industrial city, and then to a post-industrial city where services based on the legal and the professionalism has some, validity. And so the differences in the diversity of the economic resources also very important for Hong Kong to still have, a world behind it when it faces China, whereas in Macau there isn't. So I think all those are very institutional resources that historically created that makes Hong Kong and Macau go very different ways. So, and then of course the political layer that you talked about during the Cultural Revolution also adds to it, because it's easy for Macau and its political structure to be completely infiltrated and overwhelmed when you face a goliath of political power. Whereas in Hong Kong at the time, the British were still quite committed to maintaining Hong Kong as a place that they can make all sorts of advantages. And so it kept Hong Kong a little bit more with the world than the Portuguese government would ever be able to do. So I mean, all these are very historical circumstances.
不好意思，我就先抢麦克风，因为我不想念。
We'll make the questions short and answer short.
对，你们两个直接提问，然后就
然后我就在首先还是非常谢谢老师今天的演讲，然后祝福那个何律师的那个拍摄计划可以成功，真的是非常非常的期待，因为我自己也是真的很喜欢他这样子。然后因为时间的关系，我很快讲，就是因为我自己是考古学家，然后从考古学现场我们可以看到很多 object outside of place。但是如果仔细去看它的那个 context， 就是从那个 maritime archaeology 的 context 的话，当然很多都可以 make sense。然后，所以我觉得今天听老师的那个演讲非常的有意思。那我的问题是相对比较scale 比较小的，就是我自己做的研究比较在是那个 hook and network 的部分。然后老师今天提到的主要是一个 Cantonese soundscape。然后我常常在做literature surveys 的时候，觉得有一个 Hokkien word 跟一个 Cantonese word。然后这两个好像一个 filter 一样，明明在同一个区域，但是就是好像又是不同的世界，所以我不是很清楚说，就是他们彼此的 interaction 怎么样，还有说他们这些 case studies 多少可以 apply to each other， 这是主要的问题。
谢谢夏老师今天的演讲，因为给我很多启发。本来其实来之前没有想到今天演讲会这么的以香港来核心，但是确实听起来又非常非常的合理。那其实我想问的问题跟刚刚那个赵宗奇老师问的有点关系，所以也许老师已经回答了一部分，就是说，其实在这次香港，老师问了一个核心的问题，就是说香港什么让香港变得特别，或者是 what makes Hong Kong special？那我觉得其实确实在 前几个礼拜的这些事件之后，我想在没有尝试的台湾人都开始意识到香港真的有一些特别的地方。那我想问的是说，其实，在听老师的演讲之前，对于这个问题的答案，可能在台湾的讨论里面会比较集中在，其实在20世纪的部分，就是说在过去的100年间，香港在港英政府的治理下，它到底曾经发生过哪几次重要的大型的示威跟集结的那个认同的跟就是政治的意识的部分。但是其实这部分确是在老师今天的演讲里面比较没有去碰触，因为老师今天给我补充比较多的是在之前的整个大的区域历史的演变，怎么让这个地方原本就一直是一个不同文化跟人跟物品的一个流动跟交汇的一个核心这样的一个历史，然后这东西当然会跟今天香港这个社会本身的性格是有关系的。那老师后半段的呈现又跳到就是最当代的部分，就是最现在的整个等于是香港文化发展的一个成熟，作为一个成熟的一个结果，然后这样的一个文化怎么样反过来可以帮助我们或帮助香港社会去走出一个不一样的路。那不知道老师自己对于过去港英政府治理这段期间的整个事件和这段历史，对于香港形塑目前香港的一个特殊性、文化的特殊性，或者是社会的性格的一个评估是怎么样？
这两个 questions 很难回答在一起。先回答了你那个福建跟那个 Hokkien 跟 Cantonese， 我想也是因为这个历史的，看这两个 soundscape 跟世界的跟那个 Chinese diaspora 的历史不同，我觉得有点关系。最好你还是问那个 Kenneth Dean 他们。天地他们
丁和生
他们
新加坡，
因为我自己 I guess 就是说那个福建的那个 expansion into the world 就是通过东南亚多一点，可是那个Cantonese 不只是通过东南亚，还有印度，还有非洲，还有欧洲，还有其他的，所以这个就是那个他们的那个 diaspora 是多元的地区，就是连起来的，所以这个可能一开始就是已经多了一点的 historical resources 去处理那个 soundscape 跟所谓中国文化的一个关系。所以这个就是第一第二了，就是现在当然你可以说很多福建人现在已经在欧洲、在美国可是整个全球已经不同了，整个全球的价值已经不同了，所以他们现在去 global 的时候，是因为中国已经从一个非常以中国为主的一个国家体系联合跑出去的。跟我们刚刚那个 PowerPoint 讲的那个 When China was just one out of the many members of placemaking， 我想整个 diaspora 的经验都已经是另外一回事。你看，这是回答刚刚有的问题，就是说现在的全球，我很多学生还在谈那个 neoliberal globalization， 可是 it's passé， 20 years ago 我已经不讲那个 neoliberal。现在的全球是一个 post-socialist or late socialist globalization， 因为很多那些非常 top-down 的 late socialist countries 用他们的那个logic of operation， 他们的 priorities 来去全球去形成另外的一个全球的 global order， 这个跟neoliberal market 已经走得很远。所以那个福建的那个 diaspora 是从那个 new state spaces 的全球来去看的话，这是跟广东的那个 soundscape 是 从明代一直到现在都是不一样的。So again, a historical answer, but in a global sense. 我忘记了。
就是说20世纪的香港。
British colonial. 港英政府。
港英政府。
就是
对香港现在的影响。
现在英国港英你说港英政府以前的 policy， 跟香港现在的也是有一点相近的，就是说港英的那个殖民地的经验英国带来香港，把香港的那个社会做出来也不只是英国了就是有英国人，有印度人，有非洲人，有 Arabs， 有什么？因为那个 British Empire 本来就是一个非常大的一个 maritime sea power， 所以它带来的就是这个东西。所以好久我们很多代的香港人所有的经验都是这样的不是一个英国跟中国的关系，是一个很不同的 empire， 跟另外的一个不同的 empire， 那个中国的 empire 那个时候来的，中国人来的也不是广东的商人，很多福建的商人，很多其他的商人。那个时候的历史的香港就是这样的可是现在的香港呢，中国来的是国家企业，完全是两回事。所以，可是英国呢，现在已经没有办法可以跟中国这样那么庞大的那个经济做任何的 mediation， 所以这个是非常 lopsided 的一个 experience 所以我还是最要紧的就是说，我们要看那个大湾区也提到就是在现在这个情况之下那个是不是有一个角力就是说，是不是中国可以很成功的把香港跟澳门拿回去 absorb back into China in this 粤港澳，粤就是代表了广东省，港澳，深圳、江南。我讲的历史上的是省港澳，这个不是广东省，这个是 Canton as a city。OK， 粤港澳跟省港澳是完全两个不同的 historical process， 所以现在的角力就是说，中国是不是用这个粤港澳这个 concept 来去把香港跟澳门就是拿回去中国的 orbit？ 可是我们也可以看，就是说，要是香港真的有很多世界的 partners， 包括台湾，包括东南亚，包括很多那些其他的世界的 cultural and social forces behind it， 这样的话可以的还有一个 miracle， 就是把整个南中国本来已经是非常海洋的，把南中国拿出去世界，这个还就是不是 objects out of place， 这个是 naturally in place， 所以现在要打的不是就是大湾区，不是香港，不是澳门，不是广州，不是深圳，不是什么也不是中国跟世界，就是这一个 zone of actions， 就是每一层文化、经济、政治 infrastructure， 现在都是有这样的一个角度。Your generation will be able to see the result. Probably I won't. But I think that's what's happening.
当然，我们其实还有邀请我们的老师几位。那Jeff老师有没有一些回应？
没有，我其实听得很过瘾。
我有一个小小的 comment， 就是有一个人叫做Andrew Lambert， sea power states， 然后他的想法是基本上是 sea power states 是 parasitic，they live off of continental states， 所以在这个脉络，我觉得今天的报告就显示这个现象。我有一点我觉得应该注意是 James Scott 的想法，基本上是一个心理学的想法，就是人他的本性是排斥国家。我肖老师的意思，我觉得是这个是一个可以说是一个意义体系的问题。这个意义体系的问题是你怎么应付一个国家的存在，这个关系是跟逃避国家的关系是刚好是颠倒的，是一个要发明一些手段可以应付路上的权利，然后很多这个应用的这个办法都是跟符号有关系，是一个符号跟物质的现实的一个对抗，还有利用。
I agree. I mean, I've been arguing with Jim, my colleague, for the last 37 years. we co-teach courses together, and then when I talk about the power of the state in very soft forms, and then very Foucault and all that, and I can hear him sort of breathing very heavily behind me. Jim, just wait until I finish. I mean, so it's been going on for decades. But I think he might be right in some ecologies when people can successfully escape the state. But I always think that his idea of the state is too hard, too bounded, too external.
I think it's psychological.
Well, not always. But for me, since 1989, when I talk about 国家内转化, state evolution, I've been really talking a lot about not a Marxist idea of an externalized state machinery, but a much more internalized language and symbolisms of the state. I see it even in my closest colleagues in China. I mean, Liu Zhiwei is a good example. I mean, and not that he wishes to do that, but unconsciously he was doing that, And so in these little things, I've been talking about how a whole generation of Chinese, young Chinese, having experienced the very devastating power of the state and its language in their lives, that even with the dissidents and all that, all you need to look at them is when they speak, they still speak the language of the state without knowing. And that is, today, I mean, the patriotism and all that, and then Mao and Xiaofeng, I mean, all those were basically those people, and not ill will. I mean, they can be as sweet as whatever, but it is unconsciously already, speaking. And I raised those concepts way back in 1989, and I still haven't changed my stand. And so we still have a lot to, I still have a lot to argue with Jim when I get back to Yale in the fall.
好，那我想我们今天的整个肖老师的演讲以及学生跟老师的对话就到这边。那我们是不是再次谢谢肖老师和叶老师？